I'm a designer, not a historian. And I wanted to look at the mid-century plazas in New York City, titled Plaza City, and mostly looking at privately owned public spaces today. The brief history, there are sort of two parts to this. In 1915, the Equitable Building was constructed and caused shadows to fall on adjoining properties. And the year later, the 1916 zoning resolution was passed, which gave us our shaped skyscrapers in New York City. It based zoning on mass. The height was, I guess, relatively unregulated, but the building massing was controlled so as to preserve light and air. I'm deliberately skipping over Rockefeller Center, which is probably where I could start the story, but I'm focusing on post-World War II in this presentation. So the next part of the story really is the 1950s with the Lever House and Seagram's building. And these buildings set up the next stage of, I think, urban development in New York City, and they were the prototypes which led to the revisions of the zoning code in 1961. So the first shift was from sheer street wall to the step-back buildings, and the second shift was from the street wall city to the plaza city, and in particular, as it was put in place with the incentive zoning and the bonus plaza program. So Lever House, and the little sketch is not mine. I cribbed it from Google Images. But you can see how Lever House existed within the available zoning envelope. Lever House was built with much less density than was allowed, but it allowed them to create a really remarkable building, first curtain wall in New York City. But it was really the model which set forth the post-war precedent in the city of creating a setback building with a plaza. In this case, it's not an entirely open plaza. It has the low podium with the donut hole that creates the courtyard. And then the Seagram building is perhaps a little more pure setback building with open plaza. And interestingly, it was not intended as a social space. I think Philip Johnson has commented that it was really intended as a forecourt for the building. But when William White did his seminal studies, he discovered that it was actually a very good social space, that people did use those stone hedges and the benches as urban furniture. And it is a better social space than I think was intended. And then there, the Avenue of Americas, the Time Life building, the plaza here is, well, it's really a corporate address. I don't think it was intended as a social space. It may well function as that, but it really was defining a corporate address for corporate buildings. By 1961, the renewal program became a little more adventurous. This is really part of a multi-block program. But Chase Manhattan, the plazas are starting to become vertically integrated with a low rise up off of the street, and also the courtyard, which integrated the lower level of the bank lobby into the plaza with the Noguchi sculpture. And also the thinking of these spaces as a public sculpture collection, with, in this case, the use of the Dubuffet to create a sight line that went all the way down through Liberty Plaza. And then the last one in this very brief history is what was formerly called Liberty Plaza, the U.S. Steel building, One Liberty Plaza, SOM's building. These photos are from the renovation when it was transformed from Liberty Plaza to Zuccotti Park. And in the diagram, you can see how the public sculpture actually works to set up a series of sight lines and connections between these urban plazas. And of course, this has become an unintended protest site. It's interesting, the bonus plaza programs, because what was, I think, intended to create public open space for the city, much needed public open space, has often been criticized for creating fairly sterile places that are maybe even intentionally designed to not really foster much social life. But it is I think, interesting and ironic that, in fact, these bonus plazas have come to serve a social function in the city. So the next part, I wanted to look at some of the landscapes. The first part, really, you can't talk about landscape in New York City without talking about the buildings, because the buildings are predominantly what form the spaces that become the landscapes in the cities. It's true of Central Park. Central Park is really formed by the Commissioner's Grid and the street wall around it. And most of the urban plazas of the mid-century period are really formed by the collaboration with the buildings around them. So the first one I want to look at is the Lever House, 1952, Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. Restored in 2002 with Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill working on the project. It was an interesting renovation project because it raised a lot of questions about how do you restore a modernist building. And this is not really dealing with the landscape, but one of the interesting questions on the restoration of the Lever House was how to restore the curtain wall, because there were portions of the curtain wall which were decayed and needed to be replaced. And the discussion was that if it had been a stone building, you would have replaced the bad stone, and you would have left it even perhaps visually visible so that you would understand the replacement versus the original. But the Lever House was designed, intended to have a pristine, clean, uniform surface. And the debate at the time was, if you only replace the parts of the curtain wall that are decayed, you would actually end up with something that was not consistent with the original design intent. And in fact, what was done and approved by the Landmarks Preservation Commission was a complete replacement of the curtain wall. So it's a brand new curtain wall. It is slightly updated. It uses fritted glass instead of the shadow boxes that were originally there, but it does maintain the pristine, uniform surface of the building, which was considered to be the design intent. At that time, I was brought into the project to look at the landscape, which was not very well documented and was not in very good shape at the time of 2000. And the research that I did was along with Gavin Keeney, who was helping me with this, was at the Avery Library where the SOM archive was. And it was interesting to me that you could build a high-rise building in 1952 with a couple dozen sheets of drawings, a very thin set of drawings. And there was very little detail of the landscape in that set. It's most likely that it was done by in-house landscape architect at SOM, the plantings. And while the project was under construction, Isamu Noguchi was brought into the project to do some alternate designs that were never executed. And as part of the renovation, we worked with the Noguchi Foundation. It was not realistic to recreate the Noguchi design because the sculptural pieces were never executed. But we did do a replacement of the as-built landscape plantings, and we got permission from the Noguchi Foundation and the Landmarks Preservation Commission to execute the seating elements that Noguchi designed. And because of the lack of drawings on the landscape, we relied on Ezra Stoller's photographs that were taken during and right after construction to guide much of the landscape restoration work. So you can see the before and after, the Ezra Stoller and the Peter Moss photos. The most significant change is that we put in Japanese maple instead of the willow tree. The willow tree died pretty quickly within a number of years because it didn't really get enough sunlight. And then we also paid a great deal of attention to the ideas of the landscape that goes from the exterior to the interior of the building. We clarified the plantings on the roof. This is really, not a pure restoration. There was some adaptation, the replacement of the maple tree, and some other slight adjustments. But I think the key to the success of the space today is that it's really actively programmed. A.B. Rosen programs it with a changing sculpture program, and Casa Lever has a cafe in the summertime, which brings people and activity to the site. Also, during this period, a little bit later, is the MoMA Sculpture Garden, 1953. I think the 1964 version is the one we mostly remember that Philip Johnson designed with Zion and Breen, landscape architect. Bob Zion was mentioned last night. And the reconstruction in 2005. There might be some quibbles with it, but it I think largely respects the intention, and most significantly, it was done with the original landscape architects, Richardson of Zion and Breen. Paley Park, also Zion and Breen, I think one of the most beautiful small spaces in the city. These are all private spaces, privately owned public spaces. And then the later Green Acre Plaza, which is a little more complex than Paley Park, but both really beautiful examples of creating oases in the city. These were really the models for what are supposed to be the public amenities of the Bonus Plaza program. I'll show a couple more examples. This is a project I worked on. I probably could be criticized. This was a Municipal Arts Society sponsored project. We replaced a Paul Freeburg Plaza from 1972 with a much more green and park-like plaza. These are before and after pictures. The plaza suffered from access. It was very difficult to get there. Actually, nobody wanted to go up those set of steps. That was redeveloped as part of our scheme with Rogers and Marvel and myself. And the large hardscape areas were removed and replaced with a landscape that is much greener. Those are views of that new plaza. And it also is a much more, I think, vital social space than the former. And again, there's an active program for cultural and event programming to give it social viability. The last project I'll show is the 7 World Trade Center. In the rebuilding of this building, David Childs championed the idea of returning the Greenwich Street visual corridor. And what that did is it created a new triangular space, which my office designed as the Triangle Park. And it draws on the earlier examples of Seagram and other plazas in creating a formal forecourt for the building, but it also incorporates, I think, the lessons of Holly White in terms of creating bosques on both sides, which are really good social spaces. And in fact, this site is largely populated with people most times of the year. The seating is comfortable, and there are always people hanging out in this park. And I'll just end with a question about the future of the privately owned public spaces. I don't mean to pick on Trump, but this plaza is indicative of what the public bonus plaza program has become throughout much of the city, with fairly sterile, unprogrammed, unimaginative spaces. And then the unintentional vitality of Zuccotti Park, which has become something it never intended, but in fact has provided a great social function to the city. So I think that the privately owned public spaces do provide a good service to New York City, even in their unintentional uses. So thank you.